Most people believe that if something evil ever came for them, they'd know, they'd feel it. Some instinct would fire, some primal alarm would sound, and they'd have the chance to run. What nobody tells you is that sometimes it doesn't come for you directly. Sometimes it comes wearing the face of the thing you love most in the world. And by the time you realize what you're looking at, it's already inside your home.
I have had Sunny since she was 8 weeks old. I remember the exact afternoon I picked her out of the litter, like it was a photograph I've looked at so many times the edges have gone soft. She was the only one who didn't rush toward me when I knelt down at the pen. Every other puppy in that pile of golden fur came tumbling forward, tripping over each other, licking at my fingers through the wire. Not Sunny. She sat at the very back of the group, slightly apart from the others, and just watched me with these deep amber eyes that seemed too old and too knowing for something that small. She was evaluating me, deciding, and when she finally walked forward, slowly, deliberately, like she'd made up her mind, and pressed her tiny warm nose into my palm, I understood that she hadn't chosen me because she needed me. She'd chosen me because she decided I was worth it. That distinction mattered to me then. It matters more to me now. In the 12 years we lived together, through 2 apartments, 1 house, a marriage that dissolved quietly and a loneliness that didn't, Sunny was the most honest relationship I had ever maintained. She didn't perform affection. She didn't comfort me out of obligation. When she pressed her head into my left hand, always my left, never my right, a preference she'd had since the day I brought her home, it meant something. It was a choice she made every single time, and I never took it for granted. I need you to understand all of that before I tell you what happened. I need you to understand the 12 years, the amber eyes, the weight of her head in my left hand. Because when I tell you that I knew, I need you to believe me. I need you to understand that it wasn't hysteria or grief or exhaustion that made me feel it. It was 12 years of intimacy with one particular living creature, and the absolute unmistakable sensation of that intimacy suddenly pointing at something hollow. I live in a semi-rural pocket of Oregon, about 40 minutes outside Portland. Large lots, heavy tree coverage, the kind of neighborhood where you can stand in your backyard on a Tuesday afternoon and hear absolutely nothing made by a human being. I moved there 3 years after the divorce, specifically for that silence, and specifically because the property had a fully enclosed backyard, 6 feet of cedar panel fencing, solid gate, 2-step latch mechanism that required you to lift a metal bar and simultaneously push a spring-loaded bolt sideways before the gate would swing. It was not something a dog could accidentally open. It was not something the wind could negotiate. For 3 years, Sunny had shown zero interest in testing that fence. She was 12 years old. Golden retrievers don't wander at 12. They find a patch of sunlight and they stay in it, and they look at you with half-closed eyes when you walk past. And the whole posture of their body says, I am exactly where I want to be. That was Sunny. That had always been Sunny. By a Wednesday afternoon in late September, I came home from a 40-minute grocery run and found the back gate standing open and the yard empty. I stood in that gateway for a long time, longer than made practical sense, staring at the latch. It was not broken. It had not been forced. It had been operated correctly, deliberately, by something that understood the 2-step mechanism. I walked the yard looking for any sign of how she might have gotten out on her own, knowing even as I did it that no version of that scenario made physical sense. Then I walked the surrounding streets for 2 hours, calling her name, using the 2-note whistle she'd always responded to since she was a puppy, driving slow loops with my windows down until the dark came fully, and I had to admit that she was gone. I sat on the kitchen floor that night with my back against the cabinets because I could not make myself be comfortable. I left the back porch light on. I left the dog door unblocked. I filed a report on the county shelter's website with shaking hands, and I waited, and the house had a quality of emptiness in it that felt less like the space where something was, still somehow the shape of the thing that had been there. At 11:47 p.m., I heard the dog door flap. She came through low and quiet. Not the way Sunny typically entered a room, which involved the full percussion section of nails on hardwood, the full body wag that seemed to originate somewhere deep in her torso and radiate outward like a wave, the immediate and insistent need to locate my face and be near it. This time, she simply came through the dog door and stood in the middle of the kitchen floor and looked at me. And I crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to my knees in front of her and put my hands in her fur. She let me. That was the first wrong note, quiet enough that I almost didn't hear it. She let me the way you let a stranger's hand land on your shoulder at a crowded event, tolerant, still waiting for it to be over. In 12 years, Sunny had never simply let me touch her. She had always come toward the touch. She had always leaned in, always pressed the side of her face into my palm, and made that low sound in the back of her throat, that contented groan that I had always privately thought of as her saying, "Yes, here, this is right." She didn't do that. She stood with her legs slightly too evenly placed, and she received my hands with the absolute patience of something that understood it was supposed to receive them. I pulled back and I looked at her face. She looked like Sunny in the way that a photograph looks like a person, technically accurate, precise in every measurable detail, and yet somehow missing the essential quality that makes a face rather than a surface. Same golden coat, same narrow white stripe down the center of her muzzle, same asymmetric ears, the left one slightly lower than the right, same old scar on her left shoulder from a fence wire incident when she was 4. I pressed my left palm gently against the side of her face, my left hand, the one she had always leaned into, and she turned her head a fraction of an inch away from it. Not dramatically, not a flinch exactly, just a small, subtle redirection, like a correction, like something that had been told roughly what to do in the situation, but hadn't been given the fine details. I looked at her eyes. On the first morning, I stood in the bedroom doorway and called her name. Nothing. Not the scramble of paws, not the thump of a tail, nothing. I walked to the living room and found her in the same position I'd left her, on the floor by the couch, facing the window. I said her name 3 more times. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge it. I walked around to face her and knelt down and said Sunny directly into her face from 18 inches away, and she looked at me with those flat, precise eyes, and there was simply no recognition in them. Not confusion, not the cloudy disconnection of a sick or disoriented animal, just nothing. A clean, complete absence of recognition, the way you'd look at a word in a language you've never encountered, receiving the information, understanding it as input, processing none of its meaning. I called my veterinarian's office at 8 a.m. and had her seen by 10. Dr. Karen Osei had been Sunny's vet for 9 years. She was methodical and unflappable in the way that only people who have spent decades looking at difficult things can be. She examined Sunny for 45 minutes, running through every standard neurological assessment, response to stimulus, tracking of movement, gait evaluation, reflex tests. She drew blood, she checked her ears, her eyes, her lymph nodes, the full architecture of her body. Sunny endured all of it with the same eerie cooperative stillness she'd shown since coming home. Not distressed, not resistant, not anything, just present and compliant and empty. When Dr. Osei came back into the room, her face had the careful arrangement of someone who had something to say and was thinking about how to say it. Physically, she told me she's completely normal. All her baselines are where they should be for her age. No signs of trauma, no signs of infection or fever, no neurological red flags in any of the standard assessments. She paused. But I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Does Sunny typically respond to her name when she's not looking at you? I told her yes, always, since the day I brought her home. Dr. Osei nodded slowly and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to try something. She turned off the examination room lights. The room went completely dark. No windows, no ambient light from under the door. The absolute blackness of a sealed interior space. I heard Dr. Osei move, and then the lights came back on. She was standing with her pen light in her hand, and she was looking at Sunny with an expression I had not seen on her face in 9 years of appointments. Come here, she said to me. Look at her pupils. I leaned in close to Sunny's face. The overhead fluorescents were bright, clinical, direct. In any normal dog, in any normal mammal, pupils in that light would have contracted to small, tight points, the iris expanding to compensate for the brightness. Sunny's pupils were wide open, full dilation, as large in that bright room as they had been in the dark. They were the same in the dark, Dr. Osei said carefully. I've been doing this for 22 years. She stopped. She chose her next words with visible deliberation. I've never seen that. A healthy eye responds to light. A diseased eye responds abnormally. This eye is not responding at all. It's as if the pupillary reflex isn't connected to anything. Another pause, as if the mechanism is present, but there's nothing behind it driving the response. I looked at Sunny's wide, still, perfectly dilated eyes in that bright room, and I felt a cold that had nothing to do with temperature begin to work its way up through the center of my chest. What does that mean? I heard myself ask. Dr. Osei looked at me for a long moment with an expression I can only describe as careful, professional honesty, the face of someone who is not willing to say what they are actually thinking, but is also not willing to lie to you. I don't know, she said. I genuinely don't know.
That night, I sat on the kitchen floor again, not because I intended to, but because I found myself there, my back against the cabinets, watching Sunny stand in the middle of the room and face the back door, just standing, not shifting her weight, not sniffing, not making any of the small, unconscious movements that living bodies make, just standing, with absolute stillness,
and facing the door as if she was waiting for something on the other side to give her instruction. I thought about all the things I knew about Sunny. I thought about the way she had always sneezed when she was happy, this sudden, explosive, undignified sneeze that seemed to embarrass her. I thought about how she slept with one paw over her nose. I thought about how she always knew when I was sad before I did, how she would push her face into my left hand and hold it there until I acknowledged the feeling I was trying to avoid. I thought about 12 years of specific, irreplaceable, accumulated detail, the private architecture of a relationship built one small moment at a time. And I sat on my kitchen floor and I looked at the golden dog standing in my kitchen, and I thought, that is not my dog. Not as a theory, not as a fear, as a conclusion. The quiet, terrible, landing in your stomach finality of something you've been circling for 2 days and have finally allowed yourself to look at directly. That is not my dog. On the second night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with the door open and I listened. And at approximately 2 a.m, I heard movement from the living room. Slow, deliberate. Not the random repositioning of a sleeping dog, but purposeful movement. Pacing, I realized. Back and forth across the living room floor in a precise metronomic line. I counted the paces. 7 steps, turn. 7 steps, turn. Over and over for 40 minutes, without variation, without acceleration, without any of the natural irregularity of an animal moving according to its own instincts and body and mood. It was like listening to a clock. At 2:47 a.m., it stopped. Complete silence. Then very quietly, I heard her nails on the hardwood moving toward the bedroom doorway. I closed my eyes and made my breathing slow and even. And I felt rather than saw her presence in the doorway, the way you feel someone watching you in the dark, that animal awareness of being observed. She stood in the doorway for what I counted as 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the red numerals of my bedside clock through the slits of my eyes, too frightened to move, too frightened to speak. Lying in the dark and focusing everything I had on keeping my breathing slow and regular, while something stood in my doorway, wearing my dog's body, and watched me. Then it turned around and walked back to the living room, and the pacing resumed. On the 3rd morning, I checked the back door. The latch was wet, not from rain. The night had been clear. Wet in the way something wet from its mouth would make a surface wet. The way a dog pressing its nose to glass leaves a smear. But it wasn't a smear. It was a series of small, deliberate contact points, methodical, as if something had been standing at the door in the night, touching the latch again and again, learning it, memorizing the mechanism, the same mechanism that had been used to open it 3 days ago. I called my sister. I called my friend Paula, who had a farm 2 hours north and would take Sunny without asking too many questions. I told myself I was going to make arrangements. I told myself I was going to figure out what was happening and what to do about it. I was still sitting with my phone in my hand when the dog walked into the kitchen and sneezed. This is the emotional gut punch. It was the sneeze. That specific, sudden, explosive, undignified sneeze. The one that had always seemed to embarrass her. The one I had seen 1,000 times in 12 years, and that I knew the way I knew my own name. My head came up. The dog was standing in the kitchen doorway looking at me, and something had changed in her face. Not the structure of it, but the quality of it. The same way a house looks different with the lights on versus off. Her eyes, which for 3 days had been flat and glassy and dreadfully still, had something moving in them, some current of recognition, distant and uncertain, like someone surfacing after a long time underwater. I said her name. She sneezed again, and then she walked across the kitchen floor with all of her old familiar noise and all of her old familiar gravity, and she pushed her head into my left hand, hard, insistent, the way she always had, and she made that low groan in the back of her throat, that sound that meant, yes, here, this is right. And I put both of my arms around her, and I pressed my face into the warm fur of her neck, and I cried in a way I have not cried since the worst night of my divorce. She was back. Whatever she was before, it was gone, and she was back. What follows is not relief. It's the part that doesn't resolve. She remembered nothing. Not in the way a traumatized animal shows behavioral changes or avoidance or hypervigilance. She simply had no record of the previous 72 hours anywhere in her behavior. She went to her water bowl and drank deeply. She followed me to the bedroom when I went to check something. She slept that night in her usual spot, her usual position, one paw over her nose. She sneezed when I scritched behind her left ear. She was sunny in every way that mattered, in every way I knew how to measure. But I called Dr. Osei and brought her in the next morning anyway, and I watched Dr. Osei check her eyes in the bright examination room, and this time Sunny's pupils contracted down to precise, healthy, light-responsive points, the way they were always supposed to. Whatever had been sitting behind those eyes for 3 days was gone. Dr. Osei found no neurological explanation, no evidence of a seizure event, no toxicological abnormality in the blood work, no structural issue that could account for what we'd both observed 3 days earlier. She sat across from me in her office, and she was quiet for a long time. And then she said something that I have turned over in my mind almost every day since. In 22 years, she said, I have never documented a case of bilateral fixed dilation in a healthy animal that resolved spontaneously with no treatment and no identified cause. She folded her hands on her desk. The pupillary light reflex is not a behavior. It's not something that switches on and off in response to mood or stress or trauma. It is a physiological function. It is driven by the autonomic nervous system. For it to be absent and then present again without any identifiable neurological event in between, she stopped. I don't have a framework for that. Neither do I.
Sunny is 13 now. She sleeps more than she used to. She still sneezes when she's happy. She still presses her head into my left hand. She is healthy and she is herself, and I am grateful for that every single day, in a way that I wasn't before September, in a way that has a weight to it now that it didn't used to. But I've made some changes. I had the back gate replaced with a padlocked panel that requires a key to open from either side. I had motion-activated cameras installed at every corner of the property, facing outward into the tree line. I sleep with the bedroom door closed now. I tell myself those things are reasonable precautions taken by a woman who had a frightening and unexplained experience, and they are, and I believe that. But that's not really why I made those changes. I made them because of the back door latch, because of the wet contact points in the shape of deliberate, methodical learning, because whatever was inside Sunny for those 3 days was spending its nights at that door, standing in the dark, touching the mechanism that had been used to let it in.
Practicing. I made them because I believe, and I have no scientific framework for this belief, no credentials, no evidence that would satisfy anyone with a rigorous standard of proof. I believe that something found Sunny in those woods on a Wednesday evening in late September. I believe it used her to get inside my fence. I believe it occupied her body for 3 days while it assessed the situation, learned the layout, studied the routines, and worked on the exit strategy. And I believe that when it left, for whatever reason, for whatever limitation of duration, or whatever goal had either been achieved or abandoned, it simply vacated her the way you vacate a room, and Sunny came back to herself, with no memory of having been anywhere at all. I believe it came back, not to Sunny, not that time. I believe the marks on the back door latch were not just practice. I believe they were confirmation. Whatever it was, it learned that night what it needed to know, that the latch could be operated from the outside, that the mechanism worked, that there was a way back in that didn't require an animal to use. I sleep with the bedroom door closed now. I check the back door every morning. I have not found wet contact points again. That there are mornings, clear mornings, cold mornings, the kind of still gray October mornings when the mist sits low in the yard and the tree line looks darker than it should. When Sunny stands at the back window and stares into those trees with an expression I cannot read. Not afraid, not alert. Something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. Something that looks almost like recognition.
I never follow or gaze into those trees. I've decided that's a boundary I need to keep because some part of me, the part that sat on the kitchen floor for 3 nights, the part that counted 11 minutes of being watched from a doorway, the part that still checks the latch every single morning, some part of me is terribly, quietly, deeply afraid of what I might see looking back.
She didn't lose her dog, not permanently, not in the way we usually lose things, but for 3 days, something came in from the dark and wore the face of the creature she loved most in this world. It walked her floors, it watched her sleep, it stood at her door in the night and learned the thing it needed to learn. And when it was done, when it had whatever it came for, it simply left. The question she lives with now isn't whether it was real, it's whether it's finished.